I was halfway through my morning coffee when someone knocked on my door like they were trying to break through it with their fists. It was 7 in the morning on a Saturday in February, and I had just gotten back from a week-long ice fishing trip up in northern Minnesota. I opened the door to find a woman I had never seen before standing on my porch, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon, and wearing an expression that suggested I had personally wronged her entire family. "Vincent Jennings?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "That's me," I said, taking another sip of my coffee. "What can I do for you?" "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that people who have never actually had real power tend to adopt. "We need to discuss your flagrant violation of our community standards." I blinked at her. I had lived in my house for 3 years now, a nice property on the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota, with about 40 acres of woods behind it. I kept to myself, paid my bills on time, and made sure my grass was mowed in the summer. I had no idea what she was talking about. "What violation?" I asked. Patricia's face turned a shade redder. "Your snow machines. You have been operating motorized recreational vehicles on community property without authorization. Multiple residents have complained about the noise and the environmental impact." I almost laughed. "Lady, I ride my snowmobiles on my own property, the woods behind my house. I own that land." "No," she said firmly, shaking her head like a teacher correcting a particularly dim student. "Those woods are part of the Pine Ridge Estates common area. They belong to the HOA. And as of today, motorized vehicles are banned from all common areas. If I see or hear your snow machines again, we will be forced to take legal action." She thrust a piece of paper at me, which I took more out of reflex than anything else. It was some kind of official-looking notice with the HOA letterhead, stating that I was in violation of community standards and threatening fines of up to $500 per day if I continued my unlawful activities. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I'm telling you that's my land. I have the deed to prove it." Patricia gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Then I suggest you consult your property records, Mr. Jennings. Because according to our documentation, that land has been part of the HOA common areas since Pine Ridge Estates was established 15 years ago. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, a spotless white SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I support my HOA." I watched her drive away, feeling a mixture of confusion and irritation. I knew damn well that I owned those woods. I had specifically bought this property because of the acreage. I had walked every inch of it, marked my boundaries, and paid property taxes on it for 3 years. I went back inside and dug through my filing cabinet until I found my property deed. Sure enough, it clearly stated that my property included 42 acres, with the back portion consisting of mixed hardwood forest. The boundaries were clearly marked on the survey map that had been included with my purchase documents. But Patricia's visit had rattled me enough that I decided to drive into town and visit the county clerk's office. Duluth on a Saturday morning was quiet, with most people either sleeping in or out enjoying the winter weather. The St. Louis County Government Center was open, and I made my way to the Property Records Department. A tired-looking clerk named Jenny helped me pull up the records for my property. She showed me the official county plat map, which confirmed exactly what my deed said. I owned 42 acres at 4892 Ridgeline Road. The boundaries were clear and unambiguous. "Can you show me the Pine Ridge Estates HOA common areas?" I asked. Jenny clicked through a few screens. "Here we go. Pine Ridge Estates. They have about 12 acres of common area, mostly around their community lodge. That's over on Forest View Drive. Something clicked in my head. Their community lodge. Yeah, it's this fancy building they built about 10 years ago, used for HOA meetings and community events. Nice place, from what I hear. Can you show me exactly where it is? Jenny pulled up a satellite view and zoomed in. My stomach did a little flip as I looked at the image. The Pine Ridge Estates Community Lodge was a large, timber frame building that sat right in the middle of what I was absolutely certain was my property. According to the satellite image, it was located about a quarter-mile into the woods behind my house, in a clearing I had assumed was just a natural opening in the forest. That building, I said slowly. What property is it on? Jenny frowned and cross-referenced the coordinates. Her frown deepened. She clicked through several more screens, then picked up the phone and called someone in the back office. After a brief, hushed conversation, she hung up and looked at me with wide eyes. "Mr. Jennings, I think we might have a problem. According to our records, that lodge is sitting on your property, but the HOA has been claiming it as their common area for years." I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. "Is that so?" Over the next hour, Jenny and her supervisor, a heavy-set man named Robert, helped me compile a complete picture of the situation. My property, which I had purchased from an elderly couple named the Stevensons, had been in their family for over 60 years. When Pine Ridge Estates was developed 15 years ago, the developer had approached the Stevensons about buying some of their land for the HOA common areas. The Stevensons had refused, not wanting to see their woods turned into a housing development. The developer had gone ahead and built the neighborhood anyway, but apparently someone had made a critical error. When the HOA was established and the common areas were designated, whoever did the surveying had either been incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. They had marked a portion of the Stevenson property as HOA common land, and no one had ever caught the mistake because the Stevensons were old and rarely ventured into the backwoods anymore. When I had bought the property 3 years ago, I had gotten a proper survey done, which clearly showed the correct boundaries. But apparently, the HOA had never bothered to verify their claim to the land. They had just assumed it was theirs. "This is a mess," Robert said, shaking his head. "The HOA has been paying to maintain that lodge, holding events there, and treating it as their property for a decade. But legally, they're squatting on your land. Can they claim adverse possession?" I asked. I knew a little bit about property law from my work as a civil engineer. Robert consulted his notes. "In Minnesota, you need 15 years of continuous, open, and notorious use to claim adverse possession. They've only been using it for 10. So no, they can't claim it." I left the county office with a folder full of documentation and a phone number for a real estate attorney. I spent the rest of the weekend reading through everything, making notes, and trying to decide how I wanted to handle this situation. Part of me wanted to march straight over to Patricia Henderson's house and shove the evidence in her face. But I had learned a long time ago that patience and preparation were always better than acting on impulse. Monday morning, I called the attorney, a sharp woman named Lisa Montgomery who specialized in property disputes. I explained the situation, emailed her all my documentation, and waited while she reviewed it. "This is cut and dry," she said when she called me back that afternoon. "You own the land. The HOA has no legal claim to it whatsoever. You have several options here. You could demand they remove the building, you could negotiate some kind of lease arrangement, or you could sell them the land. But the bottom line is, they're on your property without your permission." "What if they refuse to acknowledge it?" I asked. "Then we take them to court and we'll win. The documentation is crystal clear, but I'd recommend starting with a cease and desist letter. Sometimes that's enough to make people see reason. I thought about Patricia Henderson's smug face when she had handed me that violation notice. Let's send the letter. Lisa drafted a formal cease and desist letter that laid out the facts in excruciating detail. The land was mine. The lodge was built on my property without my knowledge or permission. The HOA was to cease all claims to the property immediately and contact me to discuss the situation. She sent it via certified mail to Patricia Henderson as HOA president and to the HOA's registered agent. I waited. 1 day passed, then 2. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Jennings, this is Brenda Freeman, Vice President of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, a woman's voice said. She sounded nervous. "We received your attorney's letter and I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said calmly. "The land is mine. The county records are clear. But we've been using that land for 10 years. We built our lodge there. We've invested over $200,000 in that facility." "That's unfortunate," I said, "but it doesn't change the fact that it's my property." "Patricia wants to fight this," Brenda said, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "But I've looked at the documents you provided, and I think you might be right. Can we meet to discuss this?" "Sure," I said, "but I want Patricia there too." We arranged to meet that Saturday at a coffee shop in town, neutral territory where hopefully things would stay civil. I showed up 15 minutes early with Lisa Montgomery, who had insisted on being there to keep things professional. Patricia arrived exactly on time, flanked by Brenda and another HOA board member whose name I learned was Donald Pratt. Patricia's face was set in a rigid mask of displeasure, but Brenda looked genuinely worried, and Donald just looked tired. We sat down at a large table in the back of the coffee shop, and Lisa spread out the documentation. County plat maps, my property deed, survey records, the original sales documents from when the Stevensons sold me the property. Everything was there in black and white. "This is clearly a forgery," Patricia said immediately, not even looking at the documents, "or some kind of clerical error. That land has been ours for 10 years. It's not a forgery, and it's not an error," Lisa said patiently. "These are official county records. Your organization built a structure on private property without permission. That's trespassing and potentially theft of property rights." "We had every reason to believe that land was ours," Patricia insisted. "The developer told us it was part of the common areas." "The developer was wrong," I said, "and that's not my problem." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Are you seriously going to try to extort us over this?" "Because that's what this is. Extortion." Lisa held up a hand. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to stop you right there. My client is asserting his legal property rights. That's not extortion. Now we can handle this one of 2 ways. You can acknowledge that Mr. Jennings owns the property and we can work out a reasonable solution, or we can go to court, which will be expensive and time-consuming and which you will lose." Brenda leaned forward. "What kind of solution are you proposing?" I had thought about this a lot over the past few days. "I'm willing to lease you the land for a reasonable rate, or you can buy it from me at fair market value, but I'm not just giving it to you and I'm not letting you continue to use it for free." "How much?" Donald asked quietly. "Fair market value for 42 acres in this area with a structure already on it would be somewhere around $600,000, Lisa said. "Or Mr. Jennings would be willing to lease it for $5,000 per month." Patricia's face went from red to purple. "That's outrageous. We don't have that kind of money." "Then you shouldn't have built a $200,000 lodge on someone else's property," I said flatly. The meeting devolved from there. Patricia accused me of being a terrible person, of trying to destroy the community, of being greedy and heartless. She threatened lawsuits and said she would make sure everyone in the neighborhood knew what kind of man I was. Lisa remained calm throughout, simply repeating that the law was on our side and that we would be happy to see them in court if they preferred. Finally, Brenda convinced Patricia to step outside to cool down. Donald stayed behind, rubbing his temples like he had a massive headache. "She's going to make this difficult," he said quietly. "Patricia doesn't like being wrong, and she really doesn't like losing." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said, "but that's my land, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't just because it's inconvenient." "I get it," Donald sighed. "And honestly, I think you're being more than fair with the lease option. But Patricia has run this HOA like her personal fiefdom for 5 years now, and she's not going to let this go without a fight." He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia launched a campaign against me that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so ridiculous. She sent letters to every homeowner in Pine Ridge Estates, painting me as a predatory outsider trying to steal their community gathering place. She organized a petition demanding that the county re-examine the property records. She even showed up at a city council meeting to complain about me, though the council politely informed her that this was a private property matter and not their jurisdiction. What Patricia didn't know was that several of her own HOA board members were getting tired of her antics. Brenda called me one evening and asked if we could meet privately. We met at the same coffee shop, just the two of us this time. "I want to apologize for Patricia's behavior," Brenda said immediately. "She's out of control, and she's going to get the HOA sued into oblivion if someone doesn't stop her." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm not backing down on this." "I don't expect you to," Brenda said. "What I'm hoping is that we can work out a deal before Patricia drags this into court and costs the HOA even more money. I've talked to Donald and several other board members. We want to negotiate with you in good faith." "What about Patricia?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "We're working on that. There's going to be an emergency board meeting next week to discuss her conduct. She's violated several of our own bylaws with her behavior, and some of the members are talking about removing her as president." "That's an internal matter for you all to handle," I said. "But I'm happy to negotiate with whoever is authorized to speak for the HOA. "Can you give me a better sense of what you're looking for?" Brenda asked. "I know you mentioned the lease or purchase options, but is there any flexibility there? I had been thinking about this." "Look, I don't need the money and I don't want to bankrupt your HOA. What I want is for people to stop treating me like I'm the bad guy here, and I want to make sure that I maintain control of my own property. How about this? I'll lease you the land where the lodge sits for $1 per year. In exchange, the HOA formally acknowledges that all of the woods behind my property are mine. You remove all restrictions on my use of my own land, and you provide me with a written apology for the harassment." Brenda's eyes widened. "Seriously? $1 per year? Seriously?" "But the lease includes a clause that says if the HOA ever tries to restrict my property rights again, or if anyone from the HOA harasses me, the lease is void, and you have 90 days to remove the structure. And I want a permanent easement that allows me to access the full extent of my property through HOA roads without restriction." "That seems more than fair," Brenda said. "I'll bring it to the board." The emergency board meeting happened the following Tuesday. I wasn't there, but Brenda called me afterwards to fill me in. Patricia had shown up prepared for battle, with a lawyer she had hired on her own dime and a presentation about why the HOA should fight me to the bitter end. But the rest of the board had had enough. They voted 7-2 to accept my lease proposal and to censure Patricia for her conduct. When Patricia tried to use her position as president to overrule them, they held another vote and removed her from the presidency entirely. Brenda was elected as the new president, effective immediately. Patricia had not taken it well. She had stormed out of the meeting, shouting that they were all making a huge mistake and that she would make sure they regretted it. 2 days later, I was in my garage working on one of my snowmobiles when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked up to see Patricia Henderson marching toward my garage, her face twisted with rage. "You son of a bitch," she screamed. "You cost me my position. You've ruined everything." I stood up, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. "Patricia, you need to leave. Now." "That lodge was my legacy," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "I raised the money for it. I oversaw the construction. It was supposed to be a testament to my leadership, and you're trying to steal it." "I'm not stealing anything," I said firmly. "It's on my property. It always has been. And I've offered you a more than fair deal to keep using it." "Fair?" she shrieked. "You think extorting us is fair? I know what you're really after. You want to humiliate me. You want to destroy everything I've built. Patricia, I don't care about you one way or another. I care about my property rights." She took a step closer, and I could smell alcohol on her breath. "You're going to regret this. I swear to God, you're going to regret this." "Are you threatening me?" I asked quietly. "I'm promising you," she hissed. Then she turned and stalked back to her car, spraying gravel as she peeled out of my driveway. I immediately called Lisa Montgomery and told her what had happened. She advised me to document everything and to call the police if Patricia showed up again. I also called Brenda and let her know about the confrontation. "I'm so sorry," Brenda said. "She's completely lost it. I'm going to send her a formal letter from the HOA telling her to stay away from you." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I've got a bad feeling about this." My bad feeling turned out to be justified. That Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens. I rushed outside to see smoke rising from the woods behind my house. I grabbed my phone and called 911, even though it looked like someone already had. Fire trucks were already pulling up to the HOA access road that led to the lodge. I jumped in my truck and drove around to meet them. The lodge was engulfed in flames. Firefighters were already working to contain it, but it was clear the building was a total loss. I stood there watching it burn, feeling a sick certainty about what had happened. One of the firefighters, a guy named Mike who I knew from the local hardware store, came over to me. "This is your property, right?" "Yeah," I said. "The land is mine. The building belonged to the HOA. Fire marshal is going to want to talk to you. This doesn't look like an accident." The fire marshal arrived about an hour later, along with 2 police officers. By that time, the fire was mostly out, but the lodge was nothing but a smoking ruin. I explained the whole situation to them, including Patricia's visit and her threats. They took notes and said they would be investigating. Brenda showed up shortly after, looking devastated. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the wreckage. "Patricia did this, didn't she?" "I don't know," I said, "but the police are investigating." The investigation moved quickly. Apparently, someone had seen Patricia's car parked near the access road around 3 in the morning. Security cameras from a nearby house had caught footage of her walking toward the lodge carrying what looked like gas cans. The fire marshal confirmed that the fire had been deliberately set using an accelerant. Patricia Henderson was arrested 3 days later and charged with arson. Because the property damage exceeded $100,000, and because she had made prior threats, she was charged with first-degree arson, which is a felony in Minnesota. She tried to claim that she was protecting HOA property from theft, but that defense fell apart quickly when the prosecutor showed the court all the documentation proving that the property was mine. The whole thing was a mess. The local news picked up the story. running headlines about an HOA president burning down a community lodge in a property dispute. I gave one interview, keeping my comments brief and factual, but mostly I tried to stay out of the spotlight. Brenda and the rest of the HOA board were mortified and apologetic. They sent me a formal written apology and asked if we could still move forward with the lease agreement. "The building is gone," Brenda said when we met to discuss it. "But we'd like to rebuild if you're still willing to lease us the land. Under the same terms we discussed," I said. $1 per year with all the same conditions." "Absolutely," Brenda said. "And Vincent, I want you to know how sorry we all are about this. Patricia should never have been in a leadership position. We should have seen the warning signs earlier." We signed the lease agreement the following week. The HOA also passed new bylaws requiring background checks and term limits for board members, and they hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations. Brenda told me they were determined to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Patricia Henderson's trial took place that summer. I had to testify about the property dispute and her threats. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her lawyer convinced her to take a plea deal rather than risk a longer sentence at trial. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the full value of the destroyed lodge. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Patricia be led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had been served, but sadness because the whole thing had been so unnecessary. If she had just been willing to acknowledge reality and work with me, none of this would have happened. The lodge would still be standing, she wouldn't be going to prison, and everyone could have moved on with their lives. But some people can't handle being wrong, and some people would rather destroy everything than admit they made a mistake. The HOA did rebuild the lodge, a smaller but nicer version on the same site. They invited me to the grand opening, and I actually went. It was important to me that the community knew I wasn't their enemy. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone or take anything from them. I had just been defending what was rightfully mine. At the opening, I met a lot of my neighbors for the first time. Most of them were good people who had been caught up in Patricia's drama through no fault of their own. Several of them apologized for believing her stories about me without getting my side of things first. A few of them were into snowmobiling themselves and asked if I'd be willing to let them ride on my trails. I said yes, as long as they respected the property and followed basic safety rules. The story even had a happy ending beyond just the resolution of the property dispute. One of the neighbors I met at the lodge opening was a woman named Gina Dawson, who had moved to Duluth from Minneapolis a year earlier. She was funny, intelligent, and shared my love of outdoor activities. We started dating that fall, taking long rides through my woods on snowmobiles in the winter and hiking the trails in the summer. Gina was a graphic designer who worked remotely, and she loved the peace and quiet of living on the edge of the wilderness. She thought the whole HOA story was insane, and she couldn't believe how reasonably I had handled it. Most people would have either rolled over and let them win, or they would have gone scorched earth and made everyone miserable. She said one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, "You found a middle path that was fair to everyone." "I just wanted what was right," I said. "I wasn't trying to be a hero or teach anyone a lesson. I just wanted to ride my snowmobiles on my own land without someone telling me I couldn't." "Well, you can ride your snowmobiles anywhere you want now," Gina laughed. "You've got 42 acres of your own private playground." She was right about that. The woods behind my house had become my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stress of work and everyday life. I had cut more trails through the property, marked them clearly, and maintained them throughout the year. In the winter, those trails were perfect for snowmobiling. In the summer, they were great for mountain biking and hiking. The HOA never bothered me again. Brenda turned out to be an excellent president, focused on actually serving the community rather than wielding power. She kept the HOA's activities focused on maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and handling legitimate community issues. The drama and petty tyranny that had characterized Patricia's tenure were gone. I even joined the HOA's Winter Activities Committee, helping to organize a community snowmobile ride that became an annual tradition. The ride started at the lodge on my property and wound through the neighborhood and surrounding areas, ending with hot chocolate and a bonfire. It was fun, and it helped me feel more connected to my neighbors. About a year after Patricia's sentencing, I got a letter from her. It had been forwarded through Lisa Montgomery, who wanted to review it before passing it along to make sure it didn't contain any threats. The letter was surprisingly humble. Patricia apologized for everything she had done, acknowledged that she had been wrong about the property, and said she had been going through some personal issues that she had handled very badly. She didn't ask for forgiveness or make excuses, just said she wanted me to know that she regretted her actions and hoped I was doing well. I thought about responding but ultimately decided not to. What would be the point? Patricia was serving her sentence and presumably learning whatever lessons she needed to learn. My responding wouldn't change anything for either of us. Instead, I filed the letter away and moved on with my life. Gina and I got engaged that Christmas. I proposed during a snowmobile ride through the woods, stopping in a clearing where snow-covered pines created a natural cathedral. She said yes, laughing and crying at the same time, and we rode back to the house to celebrate with champagne and a warm fire. We got married the following summer in that same clearing, with about 50 friends and family members in attendance. The HOA board sent a gift and a congratulatory note, which I thought was a nice gesture. Brenda came to the wedding as a guest, bringing her husband and kids. We had become genuine friends over the past couple of years, bonded by having survived the chaos together. Standing there in the woods on my property, watching Gina walk toward me with the biggest smile on her face, I thought about how strange life could be. 2 years earlier, I had been a single guy who just wanted to ride his snowmobiles in peace. And now I was getting married in a clearing that had once been the center of a bizarre property dispute and arson case. But everything had worked out. The HOA was functioning properly, my property rights were secure, and I had found someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Patricia's attempt to destroy what I had built had failed completely. If anything, her actions had led to positive changes that benefited everyone. After the wedding, Gina moved into my house officially. She set up a home office in one of the spare bedrooms and continued her graphic design work, while I kept working as a civil engineer for a firm in Duluth. We fell into an easy routine, both of us working during the week and spending weekends exploring the outdoors. We talked about building a small cabin deeper in the woods, a place where we could stay overnight during camping trips without having to pitch a tent. Gina drew up plans for a rustic but comfortable structure with a wood stove, sleeping loft, and a porch where we could sit and watch wildlife. We started clearing the site that fall and planned to begin construction the following spring. The whole experience with the HOA had taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself and the importance of documentation. I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing, and that you have to be willing to endure conflict and criticism when you know you're in the right. But I had also learned that most people are reasonable if you give them the chance, and that even difficult situations can resolve peacefully if everyone involved is willing to be rational. I kept all the documentation from the property dispute in a fireproof safe, just in case anyone ever questioned my ownership again. But I didn't expect that to happen. The county had updated their records to make absolutely clear that my property included the woods and the site where the HOA lodge sat. The lease agreement was properly registered and filed. Everything was official and above board. The HOA thrived under Brenda's leadership. They started several new community initiatives, including a neighborhood watch program and a community garden. They organized regular social events that brought neighbors together without the drama and power trips that had marked Patricia's tenure. People actually seemed to enjoy being part of the community again, rather than dreading the next petty restriction or fine. I ran into one of Patricia's former allies, a guy named Roger who had voted against my lease agreement, at the hardware store one day. He stopped me in the paint aisle and asked if we could talk. "I owe you an apology," he said uncomfortably. "I believed Patricia when she said you were trying to steal from the HOA. I didn't look at the actual evidence, and I should have." "You were right, and you handled the whole thing with a lot more grace than I would have." "Water under the bridge," I said. "I don't hold grudges." "Well, I appreciate that," Roger said. "And for what it's worth, the HOA is a lot better now than it was under Patricia. We should have gotten rid of her years ago." "What made you finally see through her?" I asked, genuinely curious. Roger shrugged. "When she burned down the lodge, I had started having doubts before that, but that was the moment I realized she had been lying to us all along. She kept saying you were the unreasonable one, that you were being vindictive and cruel. But then she committed arson because she couldn't handle losing control. That's not the action of someone who was right all along." "No, it's not," I agreed. As time went on, the property dispute became just another story in the neighborhood's history. New residents moved in who had never known Patricia or heard about the fire. The lodge was simply the community gathering place, and my woods were simply my woods. Life went on. Gina and I finished building our cabin in the woods about 2 years after we got married. It was everything we had hoped for, a cozy retreat where we could disconnect from the world and just enjoy being together. We started hosting friends there for weekend camping trips, cooking meals over the fire and telling stories late into the night. One of our regular guests was Brenda and her family. Her kids loved exploring the woods and learning about the local wildlife. Brenda's husband, Tom, was a biology teacher, and he turned our property into an outdoor classroom, teaching the kids about forest ecology and animal tracking. It was heartwarming to see how something that had started with so much conflict had become a source of joy and education. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering how she was doing in prison and what she would do when she got out. I hoped she was getting the help she needed and learning to handle disappointment and conflict in healthier ways. But mostly, I just felt grateful that the whole ordeal was behind us and that life had moved forward in such positive directions. The annual community snowmobile ride became bigger each year, attracting participants from outside the neighborhood. We established a route that showcased the beauty of the area while staying on designated trails and respecting private property. Local businesses started sponsoring the event, and we used the proceeds to maintain the trails and support local winter sports programs for kids. During one of these rides, a younger guy pulled up next to me at a rest stop and asked if I was the Vincent Jennings who had been in that property dispute with the HOA a few years back. "That's me," I said, wondering what was coming next. "Dude, I just want to say thank you," he said enthusiastically. I'm on the HOA board in my neighborhood over in Superior, and we were having a similar issue with a property line dispute. I read about your case and how you handled it, and it gave me the framework for how to deal with our situation fairly. We got everything resolved without it turning into a big mess. Glad I could help, I said, genuinely pleased. What was the issue? He explained that their HOA had been maintaining a playground that turned out to be partially on a private lot. Instead of fighting about it or trying to bully the property owner, they had looked at the actual records, acknowledged the mistake, and negotiated a fair solution. The property owner had agreed to let them keep the playground in exchange for the HOA maintaining it and agreeing to certain restrictions on its use. Sounds like everyone acted like adults, I said. That's how it should work. Yeah, well, you'd be surprised how many HOAs don't operate that way, he laughed. But your case kind of became famous in the property law community. My lawyer kept citing it as an example of how to handle these disputes correctly. I had no idea my situation had become any kind of precedent, but I supposed it made sense. Property disputes between homeowners and HOAs were probably pretty common, and the dramatic ending with Patricia's arson conviction had certainly made it memorable. Gina found the whole thing amusing. You're famous in the world of property law, she teased. Should I start calling you Vincent Jennings, Esquire? Please don't, I said, laughing. I'm just a guy who wanted to ride his snowmobiles in peace. But the truth was, I was proud of how I had handled things. I could have been vindictive and demanded they tear down the lodge. I could have sued for damages for all the years they had been using my property without permission. Instead, I had offered a fair solution that allowed everyone to move forward. And when Patricia had tried to destroy everything out of spite, the justice system had held her accountable while the rest of the community had survived and thrived. 5 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, Gina and I found out we were expecting our first child. We spent months preparing the house, converting one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery and making plans for how we would share parenting responsibilities with our work schedules. We talked about raising our kid with a love of the outdoors, teaching them to ski and snowmobile and appreciate the natural world. Our son, Victor, was born in early December, right as the first major snowfall of the season blanketed the area. Holding him in the hospital, looking out at the snow-covered trees through the window, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for how my life had turned out. The property dispute that had once seemed like such a huge problem now felt like a minor blip in a much larger, happier story. Brenda came to visit us in the hospital, bringing a handmade quilt from the HOA's quilting club and a card signed by dozens of neighbors. "Welcome to the neighborhood, little Victor," she said, smiling down at my son. "You've got a pretty special place to grow up." She was right about that. As Victor grew, the woods behind our house became his playground. Gina and I would take him for walks in a carrier when he was a baby, pointing out birds and deer and teaching him the names of trees. As he got older, he learned to love the outdoors as much as we did, spending hours exploring the trails and building forts in the woods. The HOA had become a genuine asset to the community under Brenda's continued leadership. They organized family-friendly events, maintained beautiful common areas, and handled disputes fairly and transparently. It was everything an HOA should be, and nothing like the petty fiefdom Patricia had tried to create. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had been released from prison after serving most of her sentence. She had moved to another state, wanting a fresh start away from the place where she had caused so much damage. I wished her well from a distance, hoping she had learned from her mistakes and would find peace. As for me, I continued to enjoy my property without restriction. The $1 annual lease payment became a running joke between me and the HOA board. Every year, Brenda would solemnly present me with a bill for $1, and I would just as solemnly write a check for that amount. We'd take a picture of the exchange and post it on the neighborhood social media page, where it always got a lot of laughs and positive comments. The property that had once been a source of conflict had become a symbol of how neighbors could work together when they approached problems with good faith and respect. The lodge on my land hosted countless community events, bringing people together for celebrations, meetings, and gatherings. My trails through the woods provided recreation for me and my family, while also allowing neighbors to enjoy the beauty of the forest. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that standing up for my rights had been about more than just property boundaries or the freedom to ride snowmobiles. It had been about principle, about refusing to be bullied or intimidated by someone who thought power and position gave them the right to ignore facts and truth. By standing firm but also being willing to compromise, I had helped create something better for everyone involved. The woods behind my house remained my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the pressures of daily life and reconnect with what mattered most. Whether I was riding snowmobiles through fresh powder, hiking the trails with Gina and Victor, or sitting in our cabin watching the sunset, I felt at peace. The land was mine, properly documented and legally secure, and no one could ever take that away from me again. The HOA continued to thrive, serving the community without overstepping its bounds. Patricia's attempt to control and dominate had been replaced by Brenda's approach of service and cooperation. The neighborhood was stronger for it, and I was glad to be a part of it. Sometimes I'd ride my snowmobile past the lodge, watching smoke rise from its chimney as neighbors gathered for one event or another, and I'd think about how differently things could have turned out. If I had been less prepared, less willing to stand up for myself, I might have lost the use of my own property. If Patricia had been willing to be reasonable, she wouldn't have ended up in prison, and the lodge would never have burned down. If the other HOA board members had been less willing to acknowledge their mistakes, we might still be fighting in court. But instead, everything had worked out in a way that was fair to everyone. The HOA got to keep their lodge. I maintained control of my property. The community benefited from having both the gathering space and the trails. And Patricia, hopefully, had learned some important lessons about humility, honesty, and the consequences of letting pride and ego override common sense and decency. As Victor grew older, I told him the story of the HOA dispute, making it age-appropriate but not sugar-coating the important lessons. I wanted him to understand that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's necessary. I wanted him to know that documentation and facts matter more than bluster and intimidation. And I wanted him to learn that being in the right doesn't mean you have to be cruel or vindictive. You can defend your interests while still being fair and compassionate. The woods that had been the center of so much drama became the backdrop for countless family memories. Victor's first successful attempt at skiing, camping trips where we'd sleep in the cabin and wake up to frost on the windows and deer grazing in the clearing. Summer barbecues with neighbors at the lodge, where kids would run through the trees playing tag while adults caught up over burgers and cold drinks. Gina often said that buying this property was the best decision I had ever made, even with all the complications that came with it. She was right. The land, the house, the woods, and yes, even the property dispute had all combined to give me a life I loved. A life filled with outdoor adventures, strong friendships, a loving family, and a deep connection to the natural world. The annual snowmobile ride continued to grow, becoming a highlight of the winter season for the whole area. We had established a scholarship fund using some of the proceeds, helping local kids afford equipment and training for winter sports. The event brought the community together every year, reminding everyone of what we could accomplish when we worked together instead of against each other. Standing in my garage working on my snowmobiles, the same activity that had sparked the initial confrontation with Patricia all those years ago, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I loved, on land that was unquestionably and legally mine. The HOA had learned to respect property rights and operate with transparency. The neighborhood had become a true community rather than a collection of houses ruled by an autocrat. And somewhere out there, Patricia Henderson was hopefully building a new life, having learned that burning bridges and buildings solves nothing. The land remained, the community thrived, and justice had been served. Sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to, and people who do the right thing are rewarded while those who don't face consequences. I fired up one of my snowmobiles, the engine purring smoothly after the maintenance I had just completed. Victor came running out of the house, already bundled up in his winter gear, eager for a ride through the woods. Gina followed, camera in hand to capture the moment. We rode out into my 42 acres of pristine forest, the snow sparkling in the afternoon sun, the trails stretching out before us. This was what it had all been about, the freedom to enjoy my own property, the peace of mind that comes from standing up for what's right, the joy of sharing something beautiful with the people I loved most. The HOA drama was long behind us, resolved in a way that had made everyone better off, except for the one person who had refused to see reason. As we rode through the woods, I thought about the sign I had recently installed at the edge of my property. It was a simple wooden marker that read, "Jennings Family Woods Private Property Friends and Neighbors Welcome." That summed it up perfectly. The land was mine, but I was willing to share it with people who respected it and me. The lodge came into view through the trees, smoke rising from its chimney. A group of neighbors was gathered inside for the HOA's monthly board meeting, probably discussing upcoming events and routine maintenance issues. Nothing dramatic, nothing controversial, just the boring but necessary work of keeping a community running smoothly. I waved to a couple of people I recognized through the windows, and they waved back, smiling. There was no animosity, no conflict, just neighbors acknowledging each other. That's how it should be. That's what Patricia had never understood. An HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule it. It's supposed to help people, not control them. Victor laughed as we hit a small jump on the trail, the snowmobile catching a bit of air before landing smoothly. Gina whooped from behind me, her arms wrapped around my waist. This was perfect. This was exactly what life was supposed to be. The sun was starting to set as we made our way back to the house, painting the snow in shades of pink and orange. The woods were peaceful, the only sounds our engines and the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. I thought about all the people who had played a role in this story. Patricia, whose arrogance and refusal to admit error had cost her everything. Brenda, who had the courage to stand up to Patricia and help create something better. Lisa Montgomery, who had provided expert guidance through the legal maze. The county clerks who had helped me document my case. And Gina, who had been my partner through it all. We pulled into the garage as darkness fell. Victor was still buzzing with excitement, talking a mile a minute about the ride and asking when we could go again. Gina was already planning hot chocolate and dinner. I began the routine maintenance on the snowmobiles, knowing they'd be ready whenever we wanted to ride again. Looking around at my garage, my house, my family, and the woods beyond, I felt profoundly lucky. Not just because I had won the property dispute, but because I had handled it in a way I could be proud of. I hadn't been cruel or petty. I hadn't tried to punish anyone except by insisting on my legal rights. And when the HOA had been ready to negotiate in good faith, I had met them more than halfway. The story of the HOA that tried to ban snowmobiles on my land and didn't know I owned the property their lodge sat on had become legendary in our area. People still talked about it years later, using it as a cautionary tale about the importance of checking your facts before making accusations, and the dangers of letting ego and pride override good judgment. But for me, it was just a chapter in a much longer story, one that was still being written. As I tucked Victor into bed that night, he asked me if I had been scared when the mean lady tried to take our woods away. I thought about it for a moment before answering honestly. "A little bit," I said, "but I knew I was right and I had proof. That made me brave enough to stand up for us." "Did she learn her lesson?" he asked, his young face serious. "I hope so," I said. "Sometimes people have to face big consequences before they understand that their actions hurt others. But the important thing is that we stood up for what was right, and good things came from it." Victor nodded, satisfied with that answer, and drifted off to sleep. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, thinking about the world I was bringing him up in. A world where fairness and justice could prevail if you were willing to fight for them. A world where communities could thrive when they were built on respect and cooperation rather than control and intimidation. Gina found me there and slipped her hand into mine. "Good day," she asked softly. "Great day," I said. "Every day is great when you know you're exactly where you belong." We walked back to the living room where the fireplace was crackling and the windows looked out over the moonlit woods. My woods. Our woods. The place where we had built a life together, weathered a ridiculous conflict, and come out stronger on the other side. The HOA was at peace. The neighborhood was thriving. Patricia was gone, and I could ride my snowmobiles whenever I wanted on land that was unquestionably and legally mine. Sometimes, justice actually works. Sometimes, doing the right thing leads to good outcomes. And sometimes, standing up to bullies and tyrants results in them losing everything while you gain peace, respect, and vindication. This was one of those times, and I would never take it for granted.